Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are immersing ourselves, really getting into the ancient Greek world, specifically the high-stakes reality of the polis.
Right, the city-state.
Exactly. Where citizenship wasn't just about rights, it was fundamentally tied to this idea of collective duty. It's quite different from how we might think today.
Oh, completely different. Forget modern individualism. If you were a man in ancient Greece, your personal honor, your penio, it was directly linked to the actual physical survival of your community, your neighbors.
And that created a system where making a mistake, especially in battle or civic life, wasn't just bad.
No, not just bad. It was the ultimate disgrace, a catastrophe, really. It often led to a fate that, arguably, you could say was worse than death itself.
Worse than death?
Yeah, we're talking about the permanent, formalized destruction of a man's identity. Sometimes it's even called a living death. You're there, but you're not in any meaningful civic sense.
Wow. Okay, so our sources for this deep dive, they give us a pretty detailed picture of how this destruction worked.
They really do. Like a
Okay.
blueprint, we can trace how the consequences escalated, starting maybe on the battlefield with immediate reactions and then moving into the formal legal system, the courts. We'll focus quite a bit on Athens, how they dealt with public shame.
Right. So our mission here is to see exactly what happened when one person's failure, whether it was, say, dropping their shield in battle, the classic
The
rhipsaspis,
shield dropper, yeah, infamous.
or maybe failing in some political duty when that threatened the whole community. How did that personal failing become absolute social and legal exclusion?
And we really need to set the stage first, establish the baseline. In the Greek world, the expectation wasn't just hope for bravery, it was non-negotiable. Valor was demanded.
So serving the city in war,
Yeah.
dying for it even, that was the highest honor.
Absolutely. Considered the peak of honorable action. And the flip side of that coin, the coward, the one who abandoned his post, or like you said, the rhipsaspis, the shield dropper, that wasn't just personal weakness. It branded you an existential threat, a civic traitor.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. This idea of absolute duty, it wasn't just like social pressure, was it? It sounds like it went deeper into their core beliefs, their ethics.
Go much deeper. It was embedded in their ethical framework. Our sources, they point to thinkers like Cicero, who might be summing up a long tradition here. He argued that actions related to justice and, importantly, utility for human beings.
Utility, meaning practical benefit.
Exactly. Practical benefit for the community. Those actions had to be preferred over everything else, even over, say, the pure pursuit of knowledge, philosophy for its own sake.
That's quite a statement. Prioritizing civic action over intellectual pursuits.
It's a fascinating hierarchy of values, isn't it? We often prize intellectual freedom, individual exploration, but for many ancient thinkers, the highest moral goal was practical. Safeguarding human society, keeping the community functioning.
So the survival of the polis, the political community, that trumped everything.
Pretty much. The logic was, if the city falls apart, what good is philosophy then? It becomes irrelevant, the foundation has crumbled.
And the biggest danger wasn't always an outside enemy, was it? Internal conflict seems to have been a major fear.
Absolutely critical point. Figures like Thucydides, Aristotle, Plato, they all agreed on this. The real killer wasn't necessarily the Persians or the Spartans attacking from outside, but stasis, internal strife, civil conflict.
Stasis, that's the term they use.
Yes, stasis. It could tear a city apart from the inside. So the rule of law, that was seen as the essential bulwark against it, the shield against internal chaos.
Okay, so maintaining the law, maintaining order, that requires civic virtue from everyone. A willingness to uphold justice and serve that community utility we mentioned.
Precisely. It's the glue holding it all together. And that civic utility, when you translate it into raw survival, especially in a world of constant warfare, well, it placed an enormous premium on the effectiveness of their main military tool.
A hoplite phalanx.
The hoplite phalanx, that dense formation of heavily armed infantry.
Right. And this is where that philosophical commitment becomes brutally physical, isn't it? When you picture the phalanx.
It's not a collection of individual heroes doing their own thing, not like in Homer, maybe. It's a coordinated wall, a living, breathing organism where your individual survival is completely secondary to the strength of the whole line.
An organism. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Defined by everyone relying on everyone else.
Totally. Think about the gear. The shield, the aspis or hoplon, it was large, round, heavy, maybe 3 feet across. And crucially, it wasn't just protecting you.
It protected the guy next to you, too.
Yes. Its left side covered your body, but its right edge extended out to cover the exposed right side, the sword arm side of the man standing immediately to your left. The formation only worked if everyone held their position and kept their shield up, overlapping with their neighbors.
So if you panicked, if you dropped that shield,
Rhipsaspis. You didn't just save yourself by making yourself lighter to run, you instantly created a gap, a fatal vulnerability in the wall. You exposed the vital organs and the sword arm of your comrade to your left.
you're essentially sentencing him to death,
Yeah.
or serious injury at least.
Pretty much. It was seen as the ultimate betrayal of the man beside you, and by extension, the entire line, the entire city represented by that line.
And this reliance, this need for cohesion, it wasn't just something they hoped would appear on the battlefield. They trained for it.
They fostered it in many aspects of life. Our sources mention things like communal activities, even specific types of line dancing, particularly in places like Sparta.
Line dancing. Really?
Yeah, it sounds a bit strange to us maybe, but think about it. These weren't just parties. They were seen as enhancing the communal rhythm and cohesion needed by hoplites fighting in the phalanx formation, practicing moving together, synchronized under pressure. It built muscle memory for collective action.
So everyday life reinforced battlefield necessities.
Absolutely. So to break that line, to drop your shield, wasn't just cowardice. It was quite literally a crime against the community's survival mechanism, a failure of everything they trained for and valued.
The moment the line breaks, the collective duty fails. And while every soldier felt that pressure, the spotlight and the consequences were often harshest for the leaders, right? The commanders.
Oh, definitely. Generalship, being a strategos in Athens, for example, was intensely political. It wasn't always about pure military skill. It was tied up with political alliances, rhetoric, public image.
So being seen as unfit for command was a political weapon.
A huge one. Rivals could seize on any perceived weakness. We see this in the careers of figures like Hyperbolus or Cleon in Athens. Their competence or lack thereof as potential generals was constantly debated and used against them.
And it wasn't just about obvious failure either. Even success could be suspicious.
That's the really tricky part. Military outcomes could sometimes seem inexplicable to the people back home, especially if victory was achieved through unconventional means. Success didn't automatically shield a general from scrutiny or suspicion about his motives, or even his loyalty.
Which brings us to that story about Phormio's naval victory, doesn't it? It really illustrates this Spartan mindset, struggling with a victory won by cleverness, not just brute force.
Exactly. Phormio was the Athenian admiral in the Corinthian Gulf early in the Peloponnesian War. He found himself facing a much larger Peloponnesian fleet, something like 47 ships against his 20.
Heavily outnumbered.
Massively. The Peloponnesians tried to use their numbers to just surround and crush him in the narrower part of the Gulf. Standard tactic.
But Phormio didn't just charge in.
No. He did something really unexpected. He arranged his ships in a defensive circle, bows facing outwards, and then he waited. He just held position.
Waited? In the face of a much larger enemy. That takes nerve.
Incredible nerve and discipline from his crews. He was waiting for the regular morning breeze to pick up, blowing down the Gulf. He knew the channel, knew the conditions.
Okay, so what happened when the wind came?
Well, the Peloponnesian fleet, being larger and maybe less skillfully handled, got crowded together by the wind and the waves. Their ships started bumping into each other, oars getting tangled, commands confused. Complete disorder.
Chaos.
Total chaos. And then, at that precise moment, Phormio gave the signal. The disciplined Athenian triremes broke their circle, surged forward, and rammed and disabled the confused, isolated Peloponnesian ships one by one. A stunning, complete victory against overwhelming odds.
Brilliant. Pure tactical genius in exploiting the conditions.
Absolutely. But here's the kicker. The reaction back in Sparta wasn't just, okay, we lost, they outsmarted us.
No. What was it?
They were completely baffled. Thucydides tells us they sent commissioners out to the fleet to investigate why they lost so badly. Because, and this is the quote, they could not understand how skill could gain such an advantage over far superior numbers.
They couldn't believe skill beat numbers.
It reveals this deep-seated cultural bias, maybe particularly Spartan but present elsewhere too, that valor, mass, sheer force should win. If it didn't, something else must be wrong. Treachery. Incompetence bordering on treason. Maybe Phormio used some trick that wasn't honorable?
So even winning brilliantly could put you under suspicion back home.
It absolutely could. It meant that any general, successful or not, was constantly walking a tightrope. The moment you took command, your reputation, maybe even your life, was subject to the interpretation of events by the people back home, or even by your own men right there. Win or lose, you were exposed.
Okay, so if the official inquiry back home was slow, the soldiers themselves weren't always patient, were they? The consequences could be immediate, violent even.
Yes, moving from that sort of abstract political danger to the raw, immediate fury of the troops whose lives were just on the line, perhaps felt wasted or betrayed by a general's decision.
The danger was right there, face to face.
Absolutely. If a battle went badly, or even if a general made a difficult tactical decision that the soldiers didn't understand or agree with, they might just bypass the whole chain of command, seek immediate retribution. We have a really vivid example of this from the Argive campaign in 418 BC.
Right, this was Sparta versus Argos, a major clash in the Peloponnese. What went down there?
Well, the Spartan king and general Agis and the main Argive general Thrasyllus were maneuvering against each other. Both armies were in position, ready for a big battle, but both commanders apparently realized their own positions were maybe more precarious than they looked. It sort of outfoxed each other into a dangerous spot.
Okay, so what did they do?
They did the militarily sensible thing, arguably. Fearing heavy losses for potentially little gain at that moment, they agreed to a 4-month truce. Time to regroup, rethink.
Sounds rational. Save lives, preserve your forces for a better opportunity.
From a purely strategic viewpoint, yes, makes perfect sense. But try telling that to thousands of soldiers psyched up for battle, ready to prove their valor.
They didn't see it as prudent leadership.
Not at all. To the soldiers on both sides, this sudden halt, this truce, it looked like weakness. Or worse, maybe some kind of dodgy deal, collusion. Thucydides says there was a loud outcry against the generals in both camps.
And it got particularly bad for the Argive general.
Extremely bad for Thrasyllus. His own disappointed soldiers were so enraged by the truce, by being denied the chance to fight, that they surrounded him and, again quoting Thucydides, he was nearly stoned to death.
Nearly stoned to death by his own men for negotiating a truce that might have saved many of their lives.
Exactly. It's shocking, but it shows how powerful that warrior code, that expectation of constant aggressive commitment really was. It could override military discipline, logic, even the general's authority.
Yeah.
Anything less than all-out battle could be seen as betrayal, demanding immediate, potentially lethal punishment.
So that honor code, it existed almost independently of the formal structures. Failure, even perceived failure, or just actions that didn't fit the heroic mold, could be instantly judged as a moral flaw.
And judged violently. That immediate visceral reaction was always a possibility.
Okay, so if you survived the potential wrath of your own soldiers, you still had to face the music back home. And this is where the charge of cowardice, or avoiding duty, becomes a political tool.
Oh, a devastatingly effective one, especially in a democracy like Athens, where influence depends on public perception, on your ethos, your perceived character.
So accusing a rival of military failure was a way to destroy their credibility.
Absolutely. The terms lepotaction, that's basically draft evasion or abandoning your post, or the infamous rhipsaspis, shield dropping, these weren't just military offenses. In the political arena, they were character assassination tools. The implication was clear. If this man lacked courage on the battlefield, how can you trust his courage in advising the city, the demos? He's unfit.
And the most famous example of this being weaponized is the case against Demosthenes, isn't it? After that huge defeat at Chaeronea.
Yes, Chaeronea in 338 BC, the battle where Philip II of Macedon effectively crushed the independence of the Greek city-states, including Athens, a massive national trauma.
And Demosthenes had been a leading advocate of resisting Philip.
Exactly. He was Philip's most prominent opponent in Athens. So after the defeat, his political rivals, particularly Aeschines, saw their chance.
So Aeschines accused him directly of cowardice at the battle.
He did. Aeschines charged Demosthenes with lepotaction, claiming he'd fled his post during the battle, and he added another charge, that Demosthenes had abandoned the city, shirking his duty during a crucial diplomatic mission after the battle. These accusations were central to Aeschines' later prosecution of Demosthenes in the famous trial on the crown. The aim was clear. Link Demosthenes personally to the disaster, paint him as a coward whose policies failed and who then ran away, ruin him politically.
But Demosthenes being, well, Demosthenes.
He's a master orator.
He didn't just roll over. And his defense is fascinating because he doesn't really try to argue the specifics of what happened on the battlefield, does he?
No, and this is where it gets incredibly clever. He performs a kind of rhetorical alchemy. He sidesteps the direct rebuttal of, did you or did you not drop your shield? Or did you run? Maybe he knew he couldn't win on those specific facts, or maybe he just saw a better strategy.
Which was?
He shifted the entire frame of the debate. He basically asked the jury, what is true courage? What is real patriotism? Is it just holding a shield for a few hours in one battle? A battle which, by the way, was a disaster for everyone, implying no individual cowardice was the deciding factor?
Ooh.
Or is it the courage he, Demosthenes, showed for years? Standing up in the assembly day after day, warning Athens about Philip, urging resistance, often giving unpopular advice, facing down threats and criticism, all for the good of the city as he saw it.
Right.
He reframed courage as consistent political integrity and foresight, rather than just physical bravery in a single moment of chaos.
So he's saying his political courage was more important, more valuable to Athens than battlefield conduct in a lost cause.
Precisely. He argued that his kind of courage, the steadfastness of the rocher, the political speaker guiding the city, was the higher form. He implicitly contrasted his long-term patriotic struggle with, say, Aeschines' more accommodating stance towards Macedon. He was essentially saying, my advice might have led to defeat on the day, but it was brave and right. His advice might have seemed safer, but it was cowardly and collaborationist.
Wow. That's turning the tables completely. He deflects the charge of military cowardice by accusing his accuser of political cowardice.
It's an amazing piece of rhetorical jujitsu. He redefined the terms of the debate, and it highlights something crucial. Even in a society obsessed with military valor, the definition of courage could still be contested, manipulated, and ultimately decided in the court of public opinion through the power of speech. The political arena could, in some cases, trump the battlefield verdict.
That kind of brilliant rhetorical defense must have been pretty rare, though. For the average citizen, if they were accused of cowardice or desertion, they probably faced a much more direct legal reckoning.
Oh, absolutely. Demosthenes was exceptional. For most, escaping the immediate anger of fellow soldiers or the attacks of political rivals just meant you then had to face the formal legal system. And the law was explicitly designed to discourage cowardice.
How so? What do the sources say?
They confirm that citizen troops faced the dangers of war partly because they knew about the legal penalties and the reproaches waiting for them if they failed. It wasn't just about honor, it was about concrete punishment.
And these penalties weren't trivial.
Not at all. They included the formal degradation of cowards. These men were officially designated as being held in lower honor than brave men. This wasn't just social disapproval, it was a legal status reduction.
A formal downgrading. And this tied into their philosophical ideas about justice too, didn't it?
Yes, there's a fascinating link. Some ancient philosophers viewed punishment as a kind of medicine, a remedy that works through opposites.
Opposites. How does that work?
Well, the idea was if someone commits a crime, say, cowardice, because they're seeking the pleasure of self-preservation or avoiding the pain of battle.
Right, they run away to avoid getting hurt.
Exactly. Then the remedy, the punishment, must inflict an opposite kind of pain, a pain that outweighs the pleasure or relief they sought. In the case of cowardice, the prescribed pain was often the enduring public shame and loss of status. It was meant to be a lasting suffering that counteracted the momentary gain of fleeing.
Like a moral recalibration for the individual in the community.
You could see it that way, restoring balance by making the long-term consequences of failure far worse than the short-term risks of duty.
And the ultimate legal consequence for serious failures, whether military or civic, in Athens was this concept of atimia, right? Total loss of rights.
Yes, atimia. It literally means dishonor, but in legal terms it meant disenfranchisement. A complete stripping away of the rights and privileges that defined you as an Athenian citizen.
What exactly did that entail? What couldn't you do anymore?
It was comprehensive. An atimos, a disenfranchised person, lost the right to speak in the assembly, to propose legislation, to serve on juries, to hold public office. They couldn't initiate certain types of lawsuits. Critically, they were often forbidden from entering key public spaces like the agora, the marketplace, or temples.
So you're physically present in the city, but legally and socially, you're an outcast, a non-entity.
Exactly. It was a form of civic death. You existed, but your voice, your agency, your ability to participate in the life of the polis was gone, permanently diminished.
And the grounds for atimia could be broader than just battlefield cowardice.
Oh, yes. It covered a range of serious offenses against the state or public morality. To show how severe and how final this was considered, Aeschines again provides a useful, if rather nasty, example.
And he was attacking Timarchus.
Precisely. In one of his speeches, Aeschines is trying to destroy Timarchus's reputation. He argues that Timarchus deserved a severe punishment and had effectively lost his citizenship forever. And the alleged crime wasn't even something Timarchus did directly, according to Aeschines, but simply that he supposedly knew about or associated with people involved in wrongdoing, specifically prostitution, which disqualified citizens from speaking in the assembly.
So just associating with the wrong things could, in theory, lead to this permanent civic death sentence.
That was Aeschines' argument, at least. Whether it was legally true in Timarchus' case is debatable, but the rhetoric itself shows the perceived finality and severity of atimia. Once that civic trust was deemed broken, the punishment was meant to be absolute and irreversible.
Okay, so if you were declared atimos, stripped of your rights, the state didn't just ignore you. It actively enforced your degraded status,
Right.
using some pretty aggressive methods.
Yes, you became extremely vulnerable. You weren't just left alone. You were subject to special procedures if you violated the terms of your atimia, for instance, if you dared to enter the agora when forbidden. These procedures were designed for swift summary action.
Procedures like apago and endexis, what were they?
They sound quite intimidating, and they were. They bypassed some of the normal, slower legal processes. Apago literally means leading away. It allowed any citizen who witnessed an atomos or certain other offenders caught red-handed breaking the rules to physically arrest them on the spot and haul them directly before a magistrate.
Any citizen could just grab someone and drag them to court.
In specific circumstances, yes. It was a form of authorized citizen's arrest, but very public and potentially rough. Endexis was slightly different. It involved making a formal denunciation to a magistrate who could then authorize the summary arrest. But both were about immediate capture and detention, bypassing the usual summons.
So you lost the dignity of a normal legal process. You were treated almost like property being reclaimed.
Or like a runaway slave, perhaps, subject to immediate seizure. It emphasized your loss of standing as a free citizen with procedural rights.
And significantly, these aggressive procedures weren't only for cowards or traitors.
No, and this is really telling about Athenian priorities. Our sources show these same summary arrest methods, apajuga and endesis, were also used against people who defaulted on debts owed to the state.
Failing to pay your taxes or fines put you in the same category as someone who fled the battlefield.
Legally, in terms of the state's enforcement tools, yes. It shows that financial obligation to the polis was considered a fundamental civic duty, right up there with military service or respecting public order. Failing to pay what you owed was seen as a serious breach of trust, justifying the state's most coercive summary measures. It all ties back to that core idea of collective responsibility.
This whole legal climate, the severity, the summary procedures, it feels like it was fueled by something more than just abstract justice. There's a strong element of personal grievance in there, too.
That's a crucial point, and a major difference from our modern ideals of justice. In Athens, there wasn't necessarily a sharp divide between pursuing the public interest and pursuing personal vengeance, or dika.
Dikai, that means justice, but also vengeance.
It carries both meanings. And in the courts, prosecutors didn't have to pretend they were purely motivated by selfless civic duty. In fact, it was often expected, even beneficial to their case, to show they had a personal stake, a personal grievance against the defendant.
So you could stand up in court and say, convicting this man is good for Athens, and it will satisfy my desire for revenge against him for what he did.
Essentially, yes. Prosecutors frequently argued that convicting the defendant served both the public good and their own legitimate need for personal satisfaction or retribution. The two motives weren't seen as incompatible. If anything, a strong personal enmity could suggest the prosecutor would be more diligent, more motivated to see justice done.
So the system almost encouraged using legal channels to settle personal scores.
Provided those scores involved actions that could plausibly be framed as harming the community or violating civic norms, yes. If my rival insulted my family, maybe I couldn't sue him directly for that. But if I could accuse him of lipotaction or embezzlement or impiety, that gave me a powerful legal weapon to pursue my ducku under the guise of protecting the state.
Which means accusations related to honor, duty, cowardice, these were guaranteed to be pursued vigorously in court. Someone always had a motive.
Exactly. The possibility of achieving personal vengeance ensured that failures related to collective duty wouldn't just be forgotten. They'd be brought before the courts, keeping the pressure on everyone to conform to those high standards of civic and military virtue. It created a self-policing system fueled in part by private animosity.
Okay, so these legal cases, fueled by public interest and private vengeance, ultimately ended up before juries. But these juries weren't like ours, were they? No lawyers arguing complex points of law, no judges trained in legal interpretation.
No, Athenian juries were huge panels of ordinary citizens, sometimes hundreds of them, and they had no specific legal training. So the trials weren't really about intricate legal arguments. They turned much more on character, reputation, and probability.
So it was more about convincing the jury who's the better person, who is more trustworthy.
Largely, yes. Prosecutors and defendants spent a lot of time building up their own character and tearing down their opponents. They appealed directly to the jurors' shared values, their understanding of how the world worked, and Athenian society was deeply agonistic.
Agonistic, meaning competitive.
Highly competitive, yes.
Yeah.
Obsessed with contests, rivalry, honor, status. So prosecutors played on those ingrained values: rivalry, enmity, the importance of honor, the sting of envy, the satisfaction of revenge. They framed the case in terms the jurors understood from their own lives and social interactions.
In that kind of society where reputation is everything, public humiliation must have been absolutely devastating.
Crushing. Losing your time, your public standing, your honor, or social death, potentially worse than legal atimia in some ways because it was constant, informal pressure. We even see this intense focus on avoiding public shame outside of Greece. One of our sources mentions a Roman case.
A Roman knight.
Yes, a man named Voliatius. He apparently owed a debt and was forced to repay it in a very public, humiliating way in some kind of assembly. The source emphasizes the ignominy he suffered, stating explicitly that this kind of public shaming was considered unworthy of a free man.
Unworthy of a free man. That phrase really captures it. The public humiliation strips away your essential status, makes you seem less than free, less than a full member of the elite.
Exactly. It reduces you, equates you almost with someone unfree, like a slave, whose body and reputation can be publicly abused without recourse. It attacked the very core of elite male identity. And the Greek system, particularly in Athens, masterfully leveraged this deep-seated fear of public shame as a primary tool for social control. The threat of being shamed was perhaps as powerful, if not more so, than the threat of legal penalties.
Okay, but what if you were the one accused of doing something shameful, maybe something violent or disruptive, especially if you were, say, young and from a wealthy, influential family? Do they have ways to try and wriggle out of it?
Ah, yes. This brings us to another fascinating aspect: the attempt to use alternative social norms to deflect legal consequences. Sometimes accused perpetrators, particularly young men from privileged backgrounds, wouldn't necessarily deny the act but would try to reframe it.
How would they do that?
They might employ what we could call the sport defense. They'd try to portray their actions, maybe assault, vandalism, drunken rowdiness, even aggressive sexual behavior, as just youthful high spirits. High-spirited pranks, the kind of thing boys will be boys engage in, especially rich boys.
So using their class status as a kind of shield. We're young elites, this is just how we blow off steam, don't take it so seriously.
Precisely that. They were tapping into a potential double standard, an indulgence sometimes granted to the ephebes, the young men undergoing military and civic training, especially those from prominent families. They might even subtly align themselves with groups known for boisterous or transgressive behavior, maybe mentioning things associated with Iphigenia performers in ritual processions known for being loud and sexually provocative.
Trying to normalize their bad behavior by linking it to tradition or youthful energy.
Exactly. And the crucial part of this defense was how they attacked the prosecutor. They'd argue that the victim, by bringing this youthful prank to the formal legal system, by seeking dico for it, was actually the one out of line.
How could they argue that?
They'd accuse the prosecutor of being petty, harsh, and vindictive, of lacking a sense of proportion, of escalating a minor incident into a major legal battle. They tried to shift the shame. Instead of shame attaching to their violent act, they tried to make the prosecutor look shameful for being overly litigious and unforgiving towards youthful indiscretion.
So, don't blame us for acting out. Blame this humorless guy for making a federal case out of it.
That's the essence of it. It was a sophisticated attempt to use social codes about class, age, and acceptable sport to undermine the legal code and shame the victim into backing down, or at least sway the jury's sympathies. It shows the constant tension between formal law and informal social norms.
This deep structure of honor, shame, legal consequence, and social maneuvering. It ultimately connects back to their fundamental philosophical views on virtue and failure, doesn't it? It explains why failure, especially cowardice, was met with such finality.
It really does. It provides the intellectual bedrock. If we look at someone like Aristotle, his ethics offer a powerful lens. For Aristotle, being a truly good person isn't just about doing good or honorable things.
No. What else is there?
You have to enjoy doing them. He says that a person who doesn't take pleasure in acting honorably isn't even a good person in the first place. The feeling, the disposition matters as much as the act.
That's a demanding standard. You can't just grit your teeth and do your duty. You have to actually like being virtuous.
According to Aristotle, yes. True virtue involves the alignment of action and feeling. So, conversely, failing to do your duty, like fleeing in battle, isn't just a momentary lapse. It stems from a deeper issue.
A failure to choose correctly.
A failure to choose what is truly advantageous, which in this ethical system is always virtue. And this failure to choose virtue correctly is rooted in a fundamental defect of character, a lack of practical wisdom or phronesis.
Phronesis, practical wisdom. So being a coward means you're unwise. You're not just scared, you're actually bad at making rational, practical decisions.
That's the implication. Cowardice demonstrates a failure of phronesis. The coward has made a profound error in judgment. They've prioritized their immediate personal survival, a short-term, lower good over the long-term, higher good of fulfilling their duty, upholding honor, and protecting the polis.
So the act of cowardice reveals a flawed moral and intellectual core.
Exactly. It's not just a physical failure, it's a failure of the entire moral personality, a defect in practical reason. And that philosophical understanding provides the ultimate justification for why society's response was so severe. The coward wasn't just weak. They were fundamentally flawed, irrational in the truest sense, and therefore had to be excised or permanently degraded to protect the moral and physical health of the community. It all fits together in this, well, rather ruthless, but logically consistent worldview. #outro.
So we've really journeyed today from the immediate physical terror of that hoplite shield wall right through to the sort of living death of civic exclusion, atemia.
Yeah, it's quite a path.
And to wrap it up, it seems clear that ancient Greek societies, particularly Athens as we focused on, they didn't just rely on shouting orders or basic training to enforce valor and civic duty. It was this incredibly complex, multi-layered system.
Absolutely. It involved formal legal penalties, the constant threat of public shaming, the weaponization of accusations in politics, and this deep philosophical belief linking virtue with practical wisdom. Your public reputation, your taimo, wasn't just about feeling good, it was your lifeline. It determined your political survival, and collectively it underpinned the physical safety of the community, especially in that crucial phalanx formation.
That image of the rhipsaspis, the shield dropper, it wasn't just a wartime offense then. It became this potent symbol of ultimate civic betrayal, a stain that was deliberately made permanent through things like summary arrests, apagoga, and fueled by that acceptance of personal vengeance, diko, within the legal system.
Right. Failure wasn't a private matter you could just move on from. It was inherently public, a crime against the collective that demanded a public, often permanent, reckoning.
But here's a final thought, maybe something a bit ironic. We saw this society that prized martial valor, the physical courage of the hoplite, seemingly above all else. Yet it was still vulnerable, wasn't it, to having that very concept of courage redefined?
That Demosthenes example is really striking in that regard.
Exactly. You have Demosthenes accused of actual battlefield cowardice, managing to shift the entire debate. He successfully argued, or at least convinced enough jurors, that his political courage, his rhetorical steadfastness, was the truer, more important form of valor.
It suggests that even in a warrior culture, the ultimate battleground could sometimes shift. The fight for honor, for political survival, could move away from the physical clash of arms.
And into the assembly, the courtroom. The power of persuasion, of rhetoric, could ultimately challenge, maybe even overcome, the brute facts of the battlefield. The ability to define courage became its own form of power.
A fascinating tension, isn't it, between the deed and the word, even when the deed seemed paramount.
It certainly is. A lot to think about there. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.